to the virtual launch for Book 2 in the Corner of Her Eye series, The Road by JJ Carpenter. I'm Laura Chillingirian, ABC News radio presenter and the narrator of the audiobook series of The Corner of Her Eye, the first of which isn't too far away. Now, from wherever you may be tuning in today around the world, I just want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognising the continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. I'd like to pay my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Now, the reason we take time to do this is to remind Australians that every day we live, work and dream on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands. I'm speaking to you today from Gadigal land, a place you probably know as Sydney. Today, JJ and I are going to read from Book 2, followed by a Q&A with special guests asking some of the questions. So let's kick things off with the author of the moment, JJ Carpenter, reading a part of The Corner of Her Eye, The Road. JJ.
Hi everybody, this is obviously JJ Carpenter here. Thank you so much, Laura, for all that you do, but in particular for joining me for this virtual launch of Book 2 of The Corner of Her Eye series. I also have Book 1 to show off because I just love them. I also want to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land on which I am broadcasting from today in Canberra, and to thank Laura for her wonderful acknowledgement of country and an explanation of why we do this. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are joining from around the world. I'm so glad to have you here. I am actually going to be reading a little recap that I have put at the beginning of the book. So I don't know why we don't do this more often for books. Actually, I've never seen it done before. We do them for TV series, and if you're anything like me, I just read so many books that I'd sometimes need just a little bit of a refresher of what happened at the end of the last series. So I've got a recap right at the start. A little bit of a spoiler warning for those who haven't read Book 1 yet. You might want to turn the volume off or just go get yourself a nice cuppa while I read this bit. I promise you'll be able to listen to the lovely Laura. So here we go. Book 1 recap. This is not a synopsis of Book 1. This is a short memory jogger of some of the key premises and themes comprising Charlie's supernatural world. It's deliberately been kept short with a few extra new tidbits to keep you interested long enough to speed on through to chapter 1 and get right back into it. If you haven't read Book 1, The Keeper yet, I strongly encourage you to do so before reading Book 2. The below contains all sorts of spoilers, but still won't give you a full sense of the story. Charlie White is a keeper, a gardien du purgatoire, as her best friend Tess would say, a keeper of purgatory. When we first met Charlie in Book 1, her life had been turned on its head. She'd thought she'd moved across country and into an old remote cottage in the small town of Greenfields, New South Wales, to escape some of the craziness in her life. With her peanut allergy becoming increasingly severe, so sensitive she couldn't even survive the smell of a warmed peanut, she'd fled her high-flying life in Sydney and run straight into something even more peculiar. As a keeper, Charlie draws spirits to her that need help crossing over, or that are somehow imbalanced. Not all spirits move on straight away, after death. Some linger, needing to experience something they never had the chance to, or to process what did happen to them in life before they can move on. These spirits wait in purgatory, experiencing or reliving these moments before moving on to whatever comes after death. Even Charlie, and those like her, don't know what that is. Heaven, hell, reincarnation, ascension, oblivion. She won't know until it's her time. Charlie herself hates the term purgatory, which conjures Catholic incubuses of aborted babies and unbaptised children. She prefers to describe it as the waiting place and to call it the dream. She sees this as a far more peaceful concept, at least on the surface. The concept of the dream of time doesn't exist after death, and it certainly doesn't exist in the dream. It was Tess who'd verbalised the concept for Charlie. The theory that when someone dies, time doesn't matter anymore. They would be with all the people they'd ever loved and who had ever loved them, even after those they'd left behind had lived a full life. It was a comforting thought. There are many types of spirits in the dream. Charlie has only encountered 4 of them so far. The blues, which are usually children who need to continue playing a while longer to experience the adventure and mischief of life before they can move on. The first spirit Charlie helped was a blue, Marie, the 9-year-old girl who'd been murdered on Charlie's property almost 100 years ago. Charlie helped Marie to come to accept that she was a blue spirit and to understand what it was she needed to experience before she could move on. Marie still sometimes makes herself known around the cottage even now, moving a cup or a chair, but ever since she's found balance, she's been much calmer and her mischief-making more sporadic. The second type of spirit Charlie encountered and spent more time with than she'd have liked are the greys. These are spirits who've experienced great pain and fear in their lives, terror even. This emotion is something they need to process before they can move on, and in doing so, the fear consumes them until they are ready to let it go. The greys are terrifying. Thankfully, the grey that haunted Charlie's property, the swag man who murdered Marie, hasn't shown himself since Marie's spirit was released. The third type of spirit are the purples. Charlie's initial experience with these spirits was fleeting. These were people who had been repressed in life in some way, who hadn't been able to be their fullest, freest selves in life. In the dream, they are able to deeply explore and express that part of themselves, and so are often described as temptresses. The final spirit Charlie has experienced with are the whites, or more aptly, keepers, like herself. Well, sort of like herself. Keepers generally only exist in the dream, needing to be able to fully disconnect from the world to help the spirits, to keep the balance. The only other keeper Charlie had met, Alexander Cooper, had been comatose for decades. Charlie was a lucky one. She'd found a tether able to keep her connected to the living world when she needed to enter the dream. She wasn't ready to leave the land of the living, not yet. Tess Boucher is Charlie's tether, her closest friend in this world, a domestic violence survivor from France who stayed in Australia with her now adult son Leon after escaping her Australian lover. We also can't forget Trent, the lovable local librarian who has a thirst for local history and gives the best hugs. The final character you need to remember is Marianne, the psycho-psych. Marianne is what she calls a seeker, someone whose duty it is to find guides like Charlie and help them come to terms with and accept their purpose. The purpose above all else, to keep the balance in the dream. And I have a little trigger warning at the end as well. I don't normally do trigger warnings because I write horror, but where this could have an impact on somebody from their own trauma, I do like to put it in. So among its supernatural and morbid content, Book 2 of the Corner of Her Eye series contains references to violent sexual assault and alcoholism. The fictitious accounts of historical atrocities committed against First Nations Australians may also be traumatic for some readers. So I have been told it is a little bit darker than Book 1. Some of you might actually like that. But now I'm actually going to hand over to Laura, the fabulous narrator of the book series, whose voice is far nicer than mine, and she'll actually read a part of the book for you. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Jess. Chapter 8. I'm crazy to feel so alone. Charlie lay on the grass, her head nestled in Tess's lap, and closed her eyes. She could feel the stiff grass prickling her bare legs and arms and jabbing through her thin cotton top. She was taking deep, calming breaths, trying to relax every muscle in her body and becoming more aware of her body as she did so. Every ache, every twinge, every taut muscle. She drew on the mindfulness exercises she'd learnt during anxiety counselling sessions to ground herself. Eventually, even the sensation of the grass faded away, and it was as if the only thing that existed was her breath, flooding in and out in a gentle tidal motion. This was the first time Charlie had deliberately tried to enter the dream since helping Marie. Fear niggled at the edge of her calm. Would she be able to get back this time? The last time she deliberately entered the dream, she thought it would be for good, a journey there would be no coming back from. What if it tries to keep me this time? Another sensation came through beyond her breathing. Someone was tenderly stroking her hair. My tether won't let me go. I trust her. Charlie relaxed and felt herself being sucked into the dream. As it pulled her, she formed her intent in her mind. Who are Trent's spirits? Charlie knew she was in the dream without needing to see. Her skin prickled with cold and damp. Her nose was assailed by an unexpected smell that threatened to overpower her, a heavy scent of vinegar, sweat, damp, and urine. If not for these sensations, she could have been forgiven for thinking she was somewhere else. It was dark where she was, not just dim, but pitch black. She understood the term pitch black now more than she ever had before. It was as if the world around her was as thick and dark as tar smothering her, her eyes strained in the gloom. The more she tried to focus, the more the darkness seemed to pulse at her. Whether her eyes were closed or open made no difference. Just as she was starting to panic and think she'd made a terrible mistake trying to enter the dream and fearing she was actually stuck in some in-between, she heard a scraping noise in front of her. If she'd been corporeal, she would have jumped. Even still, she felt her being vibrate and quake in shock and anticipation. The scraping sound came again, like something thick and heavy was being dragged across the stone floors. She made herself as small as possible, hugging down to the ground and gliding backwards away from the scraping sound. In this state, she could feel the corners around her spreading up, left, right, and across the floor. How big the space was, she couldn't tell. And she didn't want to put her arms out to find out, lest she touch the source of that sound. I can hear you. A rasping, gruff voice broke the silence. Charlie felt fear pounding through her like it was pressing on her as much as the darkness. The man's voice suddenly fractured into delirious giggles that pitched and keened, bouncing off the walls around her. She felt positively electric, buzzing like static. Back again to torture poor Edmund. I'm not here to hurt you, Charlie tried to send confidently and calmly into the darkness. Edmund, where are we? What is this place? My jewel, my joy, don't trouble me with the drum, Edmund began muttering, almost singing. Play the dead march as my corpse goes along, and over my body throw handfuls of laurel, and let them all know that I'm going to my rest. The scraping sound began again in earnest as Edmund finished his ditty. Charlie tried to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but in the dark it was like there was no up and down. She felt as though everything was spinning and tilting. Edmund, Charlie sent again desperately. Where are we? Can you feel the pinch in your gut? Only the hangman is waiting for me. Edmund screamed, the scraping sound turning into scrambling as Edmund crawled fervently across the darkness and into Charlie's corner. She couldn't see Edmund, but she could feel him pushing through her. While she had no form in this place and he couldn't physically touch her, she still felt his presence. He exerted such a strong and manic force that the emotion itself had body. I know you're here, Edmund wailed right on top of her. She wished she could at least see him, see where it was they were sitting, this cold, hard, dark place. Help me, Edmund raged. Let me out. It's in here with me. Let me out. Charlie willed herself away from Edmund with all the sanity left in her, like she was grasping blindly for a handhold. Light suddenly blinded her, spilling around her. It took a moment for the piercing glare to fade and for the washed-out world to become crisp again. She was in a hallway, lights flickering above her, a solid door before her. She could hear Edmund wailing from inside, his rantings becoming more frenzied with each passing breath. Despite her lingering fear and concern for him, with the darkness still fresh in her mind, all she could feel was relief to be free. Relief with a note of hysteria. The sound of solid shoes echoing on the stones brought her attention up. Two men were walking towards her, both in red jackets with white trousers tucked into knee-high boots. One carried what looked to be a long rifle leaning against one shoulder. 7 days already, the man with the gun was saying to the other. Yeah, but he'll be back on the grog as soon as he's out, no doubt, the second answered, pulling a key loop from his belt as he approached the door. Edmund's keening quadrupled in volume as the door was thrust open. A man quivered in the corner of a tiny windowless stone cell. His hands were held defensively in front of his face. His black and yellow tunic and pants were badly soiled and hung from his small frame limply. The familiar smell of sweat, vinegar and urine smashed into her, along with what felt like a cold ice wind. The two guards crinkled their noses in disgust. The first with the gun motioned the second forward. He grabbed Edmund roughly under one shoulder, hauling him out of the room in 2 strong steps and throwing him to the floor of the hallway. Come on, Edmund, you spoony, time's up. Edmund began his half-wail, half-crazed laughter again before launching angrily and far more loudly into another song. Frog went a-courtin' and he did ride, rinktum bobby minchy cambo. Edmund was cut off as a well-leathered boot landed firmly in his side, pushing the wind from him. He doubled in pain, his eyes closing as he struggled to draw in breath again. Despite the obvious pain, Charlie felt something else from him. Gratitude, she thought in disbelief. Oh, touch me again, laddie, Edmund giggled. The guards roughly grabbed a shoulder each and began dragging Edmund down the hallway, his lifeless legs trailing behind him. Straddle-addle, ladder-bobbo, linkdom, rinkdom, bobby, minchy cambo. Edmund began singing again, softly and rasping, as he was pulled away. Charlie was left in shock in the empty hallway, staring after Edmund and his escorts. Confused, she manically clutched at the tether she could feel within her, clawing her way back out of the dream and back into Tessa's lap. Well, there you go. That's just a small excerpt from The Corner of Her Eye, The Road, the second book in the series by J.J. Carpenter. Let's turn now to the Q&A, and I'll kick off the questions with Jess. How did you approach book 2? Was it already formed in your head as you were working on book 1?
Thanks, Laura, for kicking us off with such a great question. So I did approach book 1 differently to how I approached book 2. Book 1 I wrote after moving back to Australia from overseas. It was such a time of upheaval in my whole family's lives. We'd come back from a really exciting but really full-on time overseas, and when we got back, it was just like a ton of bricks had fallen on our heads, and it made me, for one, reassess what was important to my life. And I was like, it's books. And I had all of this unresolved trauma, but also just stuff that I needed to process. And I just sat down and I started writing. I had the idea in my head, but I didn't plan anything out. It had been a long time since I picked up my pen, and I just went for it. And I was probably about a quarter of the way through when I realized this is actually something. Like, this is something quite special, and I really need to give it the time and attention it deserves. And so from there, I planned out the rest of the book. And then I also sat down and I planned out the series itself. So book 1 was a little bit more chaotic, like let the creative juices flow and then see how we go and retrospectively make it work. But book 2, I knew where the series was going, and I knew what book 2 needed to do, and I knew how book 2 was going to end. And so I sat down before any of the writing started, and I started researching. I actually got to travel a little bit, so I went up to Wiseman's Ferry, I went to Wollombi, I went to areas around the Great North Road, I stayed at Mills Creek campgrounds. I had a wonderful time at the Wiseman's Ferry Inn, which features in the book and where my first physical book launch is happening this Saturday. I just immersed myself in it, and I just read as much material as I could get my hands on. And then I sat down and I planned out the structure of the book, and then I let the creative juices really start flowing. So quite a different approach, but both were equally rewarding.
Hi Jessica, indie horror author Angel Van Atta here to ask you a few questions and to say a huge congratulations on your latest book release. Okay, question number 1. Who is your favorite Ninja Turtle? Question number 2, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? And question number 3, out of all the characters you've ever written, which one do you love to hate the most? Thanks Jessica, bye!
Those are amazing questions. Thanks so much, Angel. And you should definitely check out her books, particularly In the Tall Trees and In the Tall World, because In the Tall Trees is actually in the Books of Horror Indie Brawl competition right now, and the voting's going to start later this year over on Facebook. So, great questions. First of all, my favourite Ninja Turtle character, and yes, I did watch this on TV growing up. So, backstory, I have an identical twin sister, and we were always getting mixed up, and we hated it so much so that I cut my hair short and she kept hers long just so people would tell us apart. So my actual favourite character was Michelangelo, the goofy kind of outcast one, but he was my sister's favourite. So I told everyone that Donatello was my favourite because, you know, the smart, quiet one kind of, you know, loved him too. My favourite flavour of ice cream is rum and raisin, but I'm so picky because if it's too sweet, I don't like it. And if it's like a fake rum flavour, I don't like it either. But also it has to be creamy because real alcohol makes the consistency funny. So I am a picky fan of rum and raisin. And the final question, the character that I love to hate, and actually I like to write my dark characters with a human side to them so that you know, it goes for all of us. So like the Grey in book 1, you can almost understand at the end, at least where he was coming from, even if you still hate his guts. But in book number 2, that is the character that I love to hate. I can't find any redeeming qualities in this guy. And I don't think it is a spoiler to tell you that his name is Michael, because Charlie gets the heebie-jeebies from him straight away. So thank you, Angel, for the amazing questions. And all the best at Books and Brew.
Hi, I'm Pauline Yates, Australian horror and science fiction writer. I'm the author of my award-winning science fiction novel, Memories Don't Lie. I'm also an Aurealis finalist for my short horror story, Bloodborne, which is in Midnight Echo 18. And I am the reader of good books like this one from JJ, The Corner of Her Eye, her first book. I really enjoyed this. It was a solid debut, and I'm looking forward to the release of book 2. Today I have some questions for you, JJ, 3 actually. My first question is this. In book 1, your characters stood up on the page and shouted, "Look at me." Will they make a return in book 2? My second question is, in book 1, your richly described Australian elements were a highlight for me. Relating to the historical events that took place, were they drawn from fact or fiction? And can we expect more historical references in book 2? And one last question, and it's a question I ask all authors I interview. How much of your real life do you bring into your stories? Thank you for having me, JJ. Good luck with your new release.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and you guys should definitely check out her award-winning book 2. I am a huge fan of Aussie authors, if you hadn't guessed already, especially us speculative fiction girly authors. So go check her out. I love the questions again. So question number 1 about the characters. Absolutely, they are going to be back for book number 2. And in fact, one of the things that I was so excited about is to be able to have that platform to start from. You know, they've Charlie and Trent have met each other. We've seen how things are evolving at the end with Tess. I'm not going to give any spoilers on that because you're going to have to read the book. And yes, there is a continuation of those deep friendships between the three. The second question was about the Australian history, and absolutely, I have to include bits of Australian history in every book that I write. If I'm writing a fictional story about Australia, you can bet there's going to be some non-fiction grains of truth in there as well. One of the reasons that I am writing this series is because I think that Australian history is so fascinating, but it's also quite dark at times too, and quite often I see parts of our history ignored or swept under the rug, and that's something that I want to try and address through my books, whether it's including parts of the experiences of First Nations Australians, not told from their perspective because I wouldn't think to do that, but just showing through the lens of these novels the types of things that happen to them. And fair warning, as my trigger warning might have warned you, there is going to be some nasty recounts in this book. And I just think, Australia's history is so deep. Oldest living culture in the world, but also, colonial history, what actually happened here. I think a lot of us don't know enough about it. So absolutely expect more history, potentially even more than the first book, in book number 2. And the final question is a good one too. So yes, I think most authors write from personal experience, and I certainly have as well. So one of the examples I like to give is Charlie White's adult onset medical condition, her really intense allergy to peanuts, which just came on in her adult life. That has happened to me as well. Not peanuts though, shellfish. And it's crazy because I used to love, eating prawns, who doesn't? Or shrimp for the US guys over there. Just so you know, Aussies don't say throw a shrimp on the barbie, but that's an aside. And then suddenly I was getting, rashes and stomach pain and wheezing when I was eating it, and kind of ignored it and just took antihistamines. Oh, no, it's nothing. I'll just eat it and then I'll be giving my body more tolerance. And the more I'm exposed to it, the worse my allergies are getting. So I, like Charlie, who went from a peanut butter loving middle-aged woman to a recluse. I'm not quite a recluse yet, but I can't even smell somebody frying up shrimp paste without ending up in the closest hospital. So yes, I definitely have parts of myself and other parts of my life in all of my books as well.
Hey everyone, Ninkoan here. So you might know me from YouTube as the Hyperactive Bookworm, where I do reviews, usually while driving, and freak people out. I'm very safe doing it, despite what people think. Or you may know me from my own books. I have The Void and Coffee Cars and Necromancy. I also have a romantasy series that I've co-written with Adrian J. Smith. So I write sapphic speculative fiction, and yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. But enough about me, because that is not why we're here. We are here to say a huge congratulations to JJ Carpenter on her publication of The Corner of Her Eye. And to celebrate, I would love to know, JJ, why did you choose to write about the Great North Road? I love books set in Australia. I love finding other amazing female authors from Australia, and I'm so excited for your journey. All right, thanks y'all.
Thank you so much, Neen, and that is awesome, because as I was just saying in my answer to Pauline, I loved meeting you too, and that's been one of the best parts of my whole author journey, is connecting with readers, with authors, with reviewers, with everybody who loves books and telling stories. So you're amazing, right back at you, and thank you so much for coming on to ask me a question. Everybody check out her books. She is amazing, and you will not be disappointed. She's also so like diverse. So she can write horror, she can write romance, she can write fantasy. You've got to check her out. You will not be sorry. So that is another great question, and I get to talk about a bit more history. Sorry everybody, but I love talking about history. So what is the road? So the road in this book is actually the Great North Road in Australia. And the Great North Road is a road that was built by convicts from mostly Ireland and Britain who came across to the penal colonies of New South Wales. And this road was constructed in the 1820s, so over 200 years ago now, or about 200 years ago. And this road connected Sydney to Newcastle, which is obviously the closest city to that fictional town of Greenfields in the books, and it went inland. So it went through some pretty steep parts of our country, through the bush. The elements were really rough. There was no good access to running water, there was no good access to feed for the horses, and they did it all by hand with a little bit of help from some explosives. And we just, when I was looking into this, and I read some fantastic books out there, again, written by Australian authors, which were historical, trying to piece together as much information as I could. And the thing that stood out to me the most was there were so many gaps in our knowledge. And we were so reliant on what certain people had written about what had happened. So that is one of the most interesting things for history for me, is that we always see it through a specific lens, and there's always bits that aren't quite there. And that is a concept that I really wanted to explore through this book, again, without giving too much away. And so, of course, I did have to use some nice creative license filling in some of those gaps. For example, we don't know, or at least I don't know, I couldn't find out through my research exactly how many people did die building the Great North Road, and also didn't know exactly where all of them were buried. That's not uncommon, not just in Australia, but across the world. There are so many unmarked graves and lost cemeteries in Australia. So that history, I can't even remember how I fell down that rabbit hole, but once I did, there was no getting out. And you ask most Australians, do you know about the Great North Road? And I can tell you only one of them has said yes out of all of the Aussies that I've asked. So this is, again, part of our history, which is so fascinating, so important, but has been a little bit forgotten. And hopefully this book will help to remind us and show us why our history is so important. So thank you so much, Neen. And over to the next question.
Hey JJ, this is Travis Bruce from the Horror Room, coming from the United States. And the question I have for you, as a writer, do you have the ending in mind when you write your book, or is that something that you usually have to work your way up to? All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Travis, for your question. And I know the time difference is a killer, so I really, really appreciate you getting this question over to me. And I hope you weren't up too late. And anybody who's watching, please go and check out Horror Realm on YouTube. Follow Travis. He is just the most amazing guy, so easy to listen to, like your best friend, and he will tell you all things horror, not just books, but movies, conventions, and the like as well. So to answer your question, Travis, yes. So I now know how every single book in the series ends. So after that first little spurt writing book one, as I mentioned with Laura's first question, I sat down and it all came together. So the most important thing was getting the timeline correct. So I've got the timeline written down on a very top secret piece of paper. And so I do know everything that's going to happen in each book. I know the reveals that have to happen. I know the parts of the story that have to kind of get woven in. And I do know how the series is going to end as well. So I am writing to a known conclusion, not just for each book, but for the series as a whole as well.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask one final question. Jess, can you give us a little insight into book 3?
So that is a great one, and I'm so glad to end on that question. Before I end, I do just want to, people might be wondering why I'm holding this delightful bear in my lap, so I can't end the video without you guys knowing. Otherwise, who knows what crazy stories will think up in your heads. So this guy is actually my Mr. Buttons, and if you've read book 1, there is a teddy bear called Mr. Buttons. Mine has both of his eyes, and it's going to stay that way. The book has a bear with one eye missing, and it's an important part of the story. For those who've read it, you know why. So this guy is actually from the 1930s, from Australia. So he's my little piece of history, and I just love him. He's so old that he's losing lots of his fur. His growler doesn't work anymore, and he's stuffed with straw, and he's just the best. So if you actually come and see me in my in-person events, I'm very likely to have Mr. Buttons with me, so you can come and say hello. So to get back to that question, book 3, and you know what? I sent it to my editor the other day. So I did a little bit of a teaser for those who are following me on social media, where I had a bit of a blurred out copy of the book in my lineup for Book Fair Australia, which is happening the first weekend of November. So yes, the book is going to be out before then. I won't tell you how soon before then. I'll wait to do the proper announcement later. You'll get to see the cover reveal later as well. I can tell you now though that book 3 of The Corner of Her Road is of The Corner of Her Eye, is called The Forgotten. And once again, this is part of Australia's history that has been largely forgotten, and you'll have to follow me on social media for more little snippets and sort of glimpses in the next few weeks of what is coming in book number 3. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining the virtual launch. Thank you so much, Laura, for pulling it all together, and thank you so much to my incredible book friends, book family, for coming on and asking me some wonderful questions. I really hope that everybody enjoys book 2, and please do reach out, whether it's through a review or message me or comment on my post to let me know what you think.
Well, we've come to the end of the virtual book launch for The Corner of Her Eye, The Road, book 2 in the series by JJ Carpenter. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, don't forget, you can get books 1 and 2 on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Kobo, Apple Books, and you can also request it at all good bookstores worldwide. Stay tuned for news about the audiobooks for books 1 and 2. They will be coming soon. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you again, everybody. Thank you so much, Laura, to all of my book family and friends who came on and to join me. Love you guys so much. Love you, Laura. And I really hope you guys enjoy the book. Let me know. Bye.